Davey D hanging out with you this afternoon, and a lot of people are talking about the situation in Libya. All eyes on Libya, what is happening with Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, and doesn't look good there in terms of what is coming across our screens on TV and the reports that we're hearing. But there's a conversation that I think we need to have, because for a number of years, many people have done business in Libya, have supported and have found support within Libya. We know that Halliburton, for example, is there. We know that Britain does robust business there. So folks in the high levels of government have gone back and forth to that country, and there hasn't been this whole conversation about, his draconian measures, if he does have them, and etc. But one of the conversations that I wanted to broach was that, in many sectors, Libya, at least Gaddafi, has had strong support, or at least relations, with members in the African-American community. Minister Farrakhan is one. Cynthia McKinney just recently got back from there. But over the years, Russell Simmons had been over there. Lionel Richie. I mean, it's a who's who. We can go down the list. And so I wanted to know how people are reconciling what is being shown, what's going on. Is there another side to this story that we need to look at? Some additional pieces to this puzzle that need to be considered. On the phone line with us is a longtime activist, Troy Nkrumah. Your area of expertise is Africa, and I think you've been to Libya. And I know you've been invited there a couple of times, and you had always wanted to go. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on how we should be looking at this. As I said in the beginning, from the look at things, this is like pretty scary. And your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this subject or this issue is so dynamic that you're getting a one-dimensional view from the media. I don't care whether you're watching Fox, CNN, or even Al Jazeera. You have to totally understand the history of Libya, at least since independence from the monarchy, when Gaddafi, as a colonel, overthrew the monarchy in Libya. People don't understand that Gaddafi, there's so many things I could talk about, but for one, Gaddafi.
Well, let's start with this. Let's start with this just for a moment, Troy. Let's give a little bit of background, because you're mentioning monarchy and things like that, and a lot of people don't know that. So let's give a brief history. I know you have written stuff on that in the past, but let's give people a history of Libya as we know it today.
Okay, a real brief history. Up until the late 70s, there was a monarchy ruling Libya. Libya is comprised of several different tribal groups. A lot of Libyans don't look at themselves as Libya, a nation, but as their tribe within their, they're a member within their tribe. So the monarchy used that, kept all the tribes divided, and so that the monarchy could stay in power. Gaddafi, as a colonel, organized a coup and overthrew the monarchy, and then organized the country as an umbrella alliance of tribes. And each tribe, if you look at the structure of the government, each tribe was given equal amount of power and representation. And so, and that's the way Libya is structured to this day. Again, as I started to say a second ago, Gaddafi's not the president or even in a position of official power within Libya. He's the leader of the revolution, and there's a sector within the Libyan society called the Revolutionary Council, which is a lot of the folks that were involved with the revolution. But it's not the government. The government is called the General People's Congress, and that's made up of over 1,500 elected officials. So it's really important to understand that, because a lot of times what we're seeing in the media right now is he's thrown into this bucket with all these other presidential dictators around the Middle East and North Africa. He's thrown in the same bag as Mubarak. And people, think that, okay, well, why doesn't he just step down? Well, there's nowhere to step down to. He's not an elected official. Now, you've seen on the media, his son proposed that, okay, if you all want to change the Constitution and change the government, we can do that. But you can't ask somebody to step down from power that isn't necessarily in a position. But that's not to say he's not in power, because he gets the final word in a lot of mostly the foreign issues within, Libyan politics, foreign relation issues. Also understand, too, that Libya has been a long time enemy of the United States since the Reagan days. It started with some conflicts in the Gulf. It later led to President Reagan ordering the bombing of Libya. The U.S. bombed Benghazi, the second biggest city, and they also bombed Tripoli. And they attempted to to kill Gaddafi by bombing his house. He got out the house in time, but his adopted infant daughter didn't. So they killed his daughter. And you're right, I have been to Libya. I was there last year. I actually got to visit the house that was bombed. They left it as it is, everything from, hanging pieces of cement, glass broken, everything. It's the exact same way it was when the U.S. bombed it. So anyway, understanding that long history, even though Libya is back in better relations with the West, he's still very anti-imperialist, anti-West, anti-occupation. And so if you listen to his speeches when he came to the UN, he's critical of the UN because, like most of us are, the UN has no teeth. It can pass resolution after resolution, but it can't get anything done because it has no teeth, and it's set up in a way that one country like the U.S. or China or Russia has veto power. So regardless of what the entire UN passes totally in support of each other, one country, if they're on the Security Council, can block it. And we just saw that recently with the resolution talking about the illegality of Israeli settlements right now. And this was just a couple of days ago, and the Obama administration vetoed when every other country came together to say it's wrong, it's illegal. The U.S. said, oh, no, we're going to veto that. And so he's been very critical of that structure, which puts him in a different position again as Mubarak, because Mubarak was an ally to the U.S. He went along with whatever the U.S. said. He was, for the most part, a puppet of the U.S. and Israel. The same thing with the leader in Tunisia, the same thing with the leader in Yemen. These are all allies, even in Bahrain, where we see all these uprisings. These are all allies to the U.S. So as we were watching what was going on in Tunisia and in Egypt, it became very curious to see what was going to be next and to see if the United States covert actions, which, anybody that understands the history of covert actions by the U.S. government and the CIA know that, and if you don't know the history, read the book on the economic hitman. Read that book, and it tells you about how these type of coups, if you cannot co-opt, the first attempt is to go in and co-opt the government. If you cannot co-opt the leaders, then you try to overthrow them. If you can't then you try to assassinate them. If you can't assassinate them, then you try to overthrow them. And we saw this happen in Iraq in that same order. And same thing that we see happening in Libya right now. So I'm very cautious, and that's not to say that I'm a supporter of Gaddafi in particular, but I'm very cautious of the media that's coming over the airwaves as they tell this story of what's going on in Libya. Because what we're really seeing in Libya right now is a civil war. It's not, he hired these thugs, mercenaries from outside the country. No, he has a strong support base. I was there in Libya. I've talked to people. I've spent a week going around the country. It's not the same. I've been to Egypt, too. It's not the same. They're not armed machine guard police walking down the street. People don't understand. Libya is the richest country in Africa. And one of the reasons that it's the richest country in Africa and actually one of the richest natural resource countries in the world. But what happened in the 80s when the U.S. went to war with Libya, they decided to, through the UN, to put international sanctions on Libya, the same way they did to Cuba. So they said anybody that deals with Libya will not be able to do any dealing with the U.S. or any of our allies. You'll be totally blocked out, just like Libya. So nobody could trade with Libya. All they could do is trade their oil for food and medicine. So what Libya was forced to do, and these were Gaddafi's, this was his leadership, but not official leadership, but his leadership as a revolutionary leader. He proposed that they put a lot of their energy into growing their own food. So along the coast of Libya, along the Mediterranean, is farm after farm after farm. 90% of their food is locally grown within their country, which is very unique for any African nation and any nation anywhere. But they had no choice. Then they had billions and billions of barrels of oil, just pumping oil every single day, just storing up and reserving this oil because they couldn't sell it on the market because they were blockaded. They were banned from being involved. Then the third part was that the entire globalization brought together all these financial institutions into this, pyramid scheme, this Ponzi scheme that we just saw a couple of years ago blow up in everybody's face. The U.S. dollar fell. All the people's economies around the world fell, except Libya, because Libya was only 2 to 3 years into being on good terms again. They never got caught up in that crisis. And so when I was in Libya last year, I seen building after building going up, new airports. Everybody had a new car. There was not one beggar on the street anywhere in Tripoli. This is a major city with millions of people. I didn't see one beggar, and I went all over the city. These were realities for Libya. So Libya is a very rich country right now. And being a very rich country, having billions of barrels of oil reserves and more being pumped out every day, it only made sense that the CIA or the United States or whatever, foreign power did not let this wave of revolution stop and not hit Libya. They want in Libya very badly. Yeah, the corporations are in there doing business, but that business is not coming back to the government. And so it didn't surprise me that what we see is this total, Libya's, this poor country and people want jobs. No, people in Libya have jobs. The employment rate is nothing like it is. It's better than it is in the U.S., as a matter of fact, as well as the literacy rate. So these are things that are going on in Libya that people don't understand. They're watching the news and they're just lumping it all together with the rest of the Middle East and saying, oh, another dictator's got to go. Once he goes, those people will be free. Well, no, I think what happens is once he goes, we're going to see Libya resemble what Egypt was resembling just before their revolution, which was another puppet government run by the United States and by other Western powers, because there are opportunists in Libya, people who want to get their hands on that money, Libyans themselves, So that's what's going on, at least from my perspective and from my experience. But again, I'm not saying I support Gaddafi or his rule, but I do support the politics of the Libyan government, the socialists, the Pan-Africanists. The Libyan government has supported Native Americans here in this country, supported the Black Power revolutionaries in this country. Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, very good friends with the Libyan government, and they supported his movement, the African People's Revolutionary Party, up to this day. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, another very good friend of Gaddafi and the Libyan government. And even Chavez is saying, I'm going to hold off on my comments until, everything comes down and we see what's really going on, because we're not getting accurate information right now on what's happening over there. All we see is what Al Jazeera and CNN wanted to see. And a lot of us have faith in Al Jazeera because it's been, over these last few incidents, has been a lot better in portraying what's going on in Egypt and Tunisia and even in the past in Palestine. However, it is located in Qatar. Qatar is another puppet government of the United States. Al Jazeera does not, criticize Qatar in any way. And Al Jazeera has always been critical of Gaddafi, because Gaddafi has been very critical of Arab leaders around the Middle East and North Africa, calling many of them puppets and saying he doesn't want to be associated with them. He's an African, and so to a lot of Arabs, that's an insult. Again, just, I'm telling people, be very careful. Wait till all the information comes out. There was enough information to say, yeah, we got to, support the movement against Mubarak. But this movement in Libya, I can't necessarily say that it's an organic movement.
Let me ask you this. We're talking with Troy Nkrumah, well-known activist who's been to Libya, and his area of expertise is Africa, living there a few years and what have you. There's no denying the barbaric acts that are taking place. And,
right.
I know right here at this station, many people have been talking to folks that are on the ground, like Flashpoints and other shows. And so I tend to trust the information that's coming out. And, what I'm hearing, is something that is very disturbing. It's like, okay, folks is getting killed. I'm not talking about what CNN is saying or what have you. We're hearing that here. And if that's the case, is it a mistake to align ourselves, or not emphatically be in the corner of those who are being slaughtered? Or are we suggesting that those who are being slaughtered are somehow being manipulated or part and parcel to U.S. interest? I mean, I just, you know, and this is, let me add a little bit more context to it. When what happened in Iran took place last year, there were many people on the progressive left. I mean, there's all kind of blogs and things like that were saying pretty emphatically, don't support this. They were saying that it was CIA-backed uprising, you know, and so, you know, it wasn't just. So there's a lot of people in the progressive left that were saying this almost as if they were supporting Ahmadinejad. Personally, when I see people get killed, you know, I'm very concerned about that, you know, and I'm not real quick to jump on that bandwagon, but many people were emphatic about it, and it seemed like, to a certain degree, that similar type of things were starting to get uttered about the situation with Libya until we started seeing and hearing about the carnage. So do we give him a pass for the carnage? Do we attribute the carnage to him, or is this something else that we don't know about that we should look at?
Definitely he has a responsibility and he has accountability as the revolutionary leader of Libya, but so does the Libyan government. Now, again, there were 1,500 people elected, because Libya has a direct democracy. Unlike us here who have a representative democracy, Libya is based on what's called a direct democracy, which comes from his Green Book writings. But understand, Libya has a government that runs its military, that is in place, that is seeing what's going on as a civil war. So if Gaddafi were to die tomorrow or today, nothing would change. There would still be this carnage going on because you have a government that is fighting against an uprising, and it's viewed as a civil war. Now, the reasoning is different than the civil war in the United States, but the actions are the same. The Civil War in the United States was one of the most bloodiest wars of all time. It was horrible. Thousands or hundreds of thousands of people died, and because the South wanted to be free. Now, we were real quick to say the South was wrong, and so we have no love for those who fell on their side because they were trying to, maintain slavery and maintain the way things were. Yeah, we're exactly right in doing that. But at the time, there were people that they didn't own no slaves, but they were still fighting in the war because they were fighting to be free. My point being that we have to be very careful on which side we take right now, because this is a civil war. This isn't a democratic uprising by the majority of the population against, a tyrant government that maintains them by force. And, you got machine gun toting military people walking down the street and keeping everybody in line. That's not what's happening. You have a segment of the population, a lot of it is tribal, but a big segment of the population that is rising up, that wants a new government. And then you have those who support this government. And I got to repeat this. There are a lot. These aren't mercenaries coming in from out of the country. There are a lot of people that support this government. And so they point out, 2 jet fighters landed in Malta and these people, they defected. Okay, but there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jet fighters that didn't. So the point being that this isn't the majority of the people against one man. That's not what's happening. We're looking at a civil war. And when people say that the CIA has played a role, it doesn't mean that they're there instigating every single thing that goes on. They don't have to do that. They only have to provide a few resources at the start, and then they get out the way, and the rest, it's like a wildfire, a prairie fire. They just spark it, and the rest just catches on fire. That's what we're saying about the CIA's involvement, whether it be Iran, whether it be Libya, or what we've seen in Venezuela not too long ago. Just a few, 7, 8, 9 years ago in Venezuela, where the CIA sparked a little something. It looked like, a mass democratic movement against Hugo Chavez, but then Chavez supporters by the hundreds of thousands came out to support him. So my point being, let's be very careful, because yes, there is carnage. There's a lot of bloodshed going on, but let's be careful how we frame it, as opposed to saying it's a dictator, tyrant, authoritarian killing all his people. No, it's the people of Libya fighting the people of Libya.
We see Gaddafi on TV giving his speeches. We saw his son. We don't necessarily see the other leaders that you say have this that have this power. Why not? And who are they? And where are they? And and why do we have segments in Libya that are opposed to Gaddafi? And if they're opposed that much that they're taking it to the streets, should they not be freed?
Well, I mean, it sounds right. It sounds like, well, if people are opposed, and The same thing was happening in Sudan. Just recently, it took 20-something years before a referendum came up to whether or not to divide Sudan from north to south. You know, if that's what's needed, then maybe that's what's needed, but that's not for us to decide. Now, why the actually elected officials aren't being interviewed? Well, we have to ask the media that. You know, why are they waiting for Gaddafi to say something and got a camera ready or whatever, follow him around and get him to speak? Why don't they go to the elected officials? Because they don't even want you to know that there are elected officials. People think that he is the president and the one man running the entire country.
But he sounds like it when he speaks. You know, he's like, I ain't leaving until, you know, the last man, you know, till the last man is standing and all that. He comes across if he's the person. And when people have gone over there, you know, like some of the people that I mentioned, the highlight has been the meeting with Gaddafi. It hasn't been necessarily the relationships with these other folks.
Yeah, but see, I think that's in a lot of people's mind, necessarily that, oh, you know, Gaddafi invited us over. No, when we got invited over as a delegation, he spoke to the delegations of about 60 other countries. We were just one of them. And he gave an hour speech, but the rest of the time we were with the people and the officials and the organizers and people like that. We didn't actually get to go and shake his hand and get to talk to him and hang out with him and whatever. It isn't like that over there. He's a very, I guess you would say, eccentric person. Like I mean, even quirky at times. He rambles on about issues, but he's not stupid. When he talked to us, he broke down the entire global system and why it fell, how it fell, and how they weren't involved with it and why they weren't involved with it. He was on point. He knew the subject very well. So he's not a stupid man. He's off in a bunch of ways, and you can kind of tell the way he rambles, but that makes for good media, you know.
But when he comes to the United States, I remember he was the one that was coming to the UN, which he's been very critical of. But I remember that, you know, for example, there was a point where he was going to pitch a tent in New Jersey. I remember that because he refused to stay. You know, he didn't want to stay in the hotels or something like that. And so, you know, I'm seeing him. I'm not seeing the other people. And then the people that we have seen have defected. So I guess the question is, you know, for people who are progressive and people who, you know, who are revolutionary, is it an either or? Do you immediately side with the people? You know, somebody said to me the other day, you never side with the state, no matter what. You always side with the people, no matter who it is.
Yeah, but that's a real hard one, because again, I can go back to you know, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, a whole bunch of things. That's not a very logical statement, because eventually the people either have to become the state or they'll just be in a constant struggle against the state. But let me tell you this real quick. They've showed 2 or 3 different ambassadors, appointed people that have defected, and they found those 2, okay, or 3, and got them on the media. But there are hundreds of ambassadors. Libya has ambassadors all over the world. You know, I met the one from Venezuela. I met the one from Brazil. Where are they at? Like, you know, if they're getting all these defections of officials, how come it's only 2 or 3 that the media focuses on? And if they can find those 2 or 3, why can't they find those who haven't defected? You know, now, I don't know. Maybe the Libyan government said no talking to the media. I don't know. I wouldn't blame them based on the way the media portrays what's going on, because it's not an accurate portrayal. But, you know, if, again, a lot of this I have to put on the media. It's not as though the media is an unbiased source. I mean, we just saw that the New York Times withheld evidence that, you know, this CIA agent in Pakistan got arrested, and Obama's lying on TV saying, oh, he was a diplomat, he wasn't a spy, whatever. Comes out he was a spy. And the New York Times knew this and lied about it and withheld that information. And so it's not like these media outlets are actually looking for, you know, the truth. A lot of times they're looking for the good story. And the good story is this one, we found one that defected. You know, okay, well, what about the hundreds that didn't? So, you know, my point position is still this, that I am always with the democratic movement. I'm always with the people if they're fighting for democracy. But in a situation where there's a civil war, it's those of us on the outside have to be very careful to not jump in and pick one side or the other. I can say this man is quirky and has done some bad stuff, but I can also say he's done some great stuff for that country. That country would look more like Nigeria if it weren't for him fighting against foreign intervention and foreign occupation. Is that over? We don't know, and I'm waiting to see, because what happens after this uprising or this civil war, however it ends up, if it ends up with foreign occupation as it being another Egypt, then I would say, you know what? We were on the wrong side. Those of us who sided with this movement were on the wrong side, because the last thing we need is another Egypt. That was why we had to get rid of Egypt, for being a puppet. Africa does not need any more U.S. or West-controlled governments. That's what's got Africa in the situation that we're in now, poor and dying off,
Lastly, Troy Nkrumah, if you're just tuning in, is who we're talking to. You mentioned something, and it's an undercurrent that needs to be, addressed as well. Arab/African. I just saw actually an article in Al Jazeera that was talking about there's been an ignoring of the African revolution that's going on, and as we're speaking, the uprisings there. Can you talk about that? Because you said that Gaddafi does not have a lot of favor with Arab leaders, and that he considers himself an African, and there's some tensions around that. So what exactly is that about? Yeah,
well, in the 90s, what we've seen with a lot of Arab leaders were, like I said, they turned to become puppet regimes for the U.S. Whether they were dictators or monarchs or whatever you want to call them, they would do the bidding for the U.S. So we saw this all through the 90s and well into the 2000s and specifically now, where U.S. bases, which were never before allowed in the Middle East, are all over the Middle East now. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Yemen. You have all this military U.S. presence, foreign occupation going on, and Gaddafi had been very critical of the role that the Arab nations have taken in regards to the issue of Palestine. They were not supportive of Palestine and the Palestinian struggle. They, for the most part, just shut their mouths and went along with whatever the U.S. and Israel wanted, and they made friends and whatnot. So that just caused him, and also, you got to remember, Gaddafi has been around since the 60s. He was very aware of the Pan-Africanist movement. He was very, active within it, and he led the dissolution of the Organization of African Unity, which was, even less powerful than I said the UN. I had no teeth whatsoever, and formed the African Union. The African Union, modeled after the EU, the European Union, is the unification of Africa and the financial system, and various political systems, whatever. And Gaddafi is a leader so he's always felt a closer tie to his African brothers and sisters than he did his Arabs. The Arabs to him were sellouts. So I don't remember if it was 96, 95, 97, somewhere around there, he came out and said, you know what, don't identify me as an Arab. I'm not an Arab. Arab leaders are sellouts. He's like, I'm an African. I live in Africa. I fight for the unity of Africa and the liberation of Africa. And if you guys want to sell out to the West, so be it. I still support the Palestinians, like most Africans and freedom fighters do. Still support the Palestinians over the Israelis. And that's the position he took. And that put him in bad relations with a lot of Arab leaders that were just like, okay, fine.
But aren't a lot of quote unquote African governments, haven't they been puppets to outside interests?
Yeah, a lot of them have. And every time, and this is what I try to explain to people. People say, well, okay, if he's going to be a ruler, why can't there be democracy? Why can't they just have it where everyone votes and this and that, which they do have, which again is people's misunderstanding. But they say, well, why can't people come and go and their country just be open and free? Kind of like what we see in Venezuela. People like that model where, okay, you have an elected president, the media is free, people can come and go as they please, but then you also have a whole lot of manipulation going on there by that so-called free media that is very anti-Chavez. You have a lot of outside forces, covert forces coming in and instigating stuff. And in Africa, it's, people, because you see a very close similarity to Libya and Cuba in the way that they run the governments, except Libya had the oil and Cuba didn't. So Cuba's poor, Libya's rich. Anyway, what we saw in Africa in the 60s was a lot of these democratically elected presidents, Nkrumah, Toure, Lumumba, Kenyatta. You can go all over the African continent and find these great democratically elected leaders who led their country to independence, got elected by vote to presidency, and tried to have a very open society. Well, you can't do that and be critical of U.S. and Western, your foreign colonizers. You can't be critical of them, because what they will do is they will oust you. They will overthrow you. They will instigate a coup. And again, we saw that up and down, whether it's Lumumba in the Congo and Nkrumah, you just seen this all over Africa. People were overthrown by the U.S. interests and not just the U.S., but also the West, the foreign colonizers, Belgium, England, France. And so you're stuck in this, or Gaddafi, I believe, looked at it like this. Okay, if I have that open society, then I'm open to being, overthrown. I'm open to being assassinated, open to all of that stuff that all of them went through. Or I can close off and say, no, your media is going to be highly regulated. So if you're critical of our revolution, then we're just not going to allow you here. And,
but when do you open the doors? When do you become strong enough to open the doors? I mean, he's been there for decades.
Yeah, we can ask the same thing to Cuba. Like, when do you feel comfortable enough? And as long as you have imperialist powers, you'll never be comfortable enough. You'll never be at a point where you can just open up and just be a free society, because you have imperialist powers that are more powerful than you, that can wipe you out as soon as you open those doors. And, it's a tough call. And what happens is you create a very negative image on the outside, so that you have all these new, unknowing, understanding people looking at you as evil, as bad. And then you do the same thing from the inside, because it's so closed off that you have your own domestic folks looking at you as evil and bad, not understanding that you would have been another Nkrumah, you would have been another Lumumba if you had started off open. And, it's a catch-22. That's a no-win. Either way, you can't win in this situation. And that's the sad part. And that's what happens. That's why imperialism, U.S. imperialism, Western imperialism through NATO and the European countries, is a very bad thing, because it overthrows any of our real leaders. And so you either got to be a dictator or expect to be assassinated within your first couple of years.
We've been talking with Troy Nkrumah, longtime activist. His area of expertise is Africa. He's lived in the continent for a number of years throughout a number of countries. He's also been over in Libya. And sharing with us some perspectives that we need to maybe weigh as we look at the carnage that's taking place. And he says it's a civil war going on right now, and that's something that needs to be weighed as things unfold. As we close out, Troy, where do you see this headed? What do you think will be the final scenario here?
Well, what's going to have to happen is Gaddafi's going to have to leave in order for the violence to at least quell some. But whether he leaves or dies, it's not going to stop. It's not going to be like Mubarak. He leaves and everybody's happy and we're starting a new government. No, he has a strong base of support. The military, the federal government, or the government itself is its own entity, and they will continue to fight, if they have to maintain their power, because they're a legitimate government. They are an elected government. So,
do you think those people are being influenced or bought off or manipulated by the Western countries, including the U.S.?
Not the government of Libya. I believe there are elements within Libya that have been bought off for a long time. They're very careful about who they let into their country. I remember just us going into their country was a big deal, and it was very tight and very hard to get in. So they're very careful about who gets in, but I just really want people to be very cautious. Yes, the bloodshed is bad and wrong, and we wish it would not happen, but do not for 1 minute think that it's over if Gaddafi just steps down, because he doesn't have nowhere to step down to. There's a legitimate elected government in place. What they decide to do is what the outcome will be.
Troy Nkrumah, we appreciate it, and I think over the next few days we'll probably continue to have these discussions and, get some of the various angles in which people have been taking a look at this particular situation. Troy Nkrumah giving us a perspective that we haven't necessarily heard in the media, and, just recently coming back from Libya. We appreciate you taking time out this afternoon.
Thanks for hearing me.
Peace.